Hi, everybody. Um, I am going to give my introduction as I have the previous few times that we've done this, just to make sure that for the recording, everybody is oriented and anybody who's new here knows what we're doing and what we're about. I want to thank the NODCC so much for their generosity in setting up this fellowship for Ella specifically to analyze and work through a bunch of data that we already had collected. We were sitting there, just a wealth of information. And so that is what this whole project is about. Ella, if you want to switch. So for the past decade, I almost, yeah, it's been a decade now since we wrote the IRB for this. We started a study to longitudinally observe behavior development in children, infants and children with agenesis and dysgenesis of the corpus callosum. As you all know, it can be diagnosed prenatally, but very little is known about what is expected or what should be expected over those early years, what's common, maybe which subgroups have delays, those kind of things. And the best way to start studying that is to gather information about what is actually happening in people's lives. So, what is the natural current status of life for people with these conditions? And that is what a natural history is. So, we have two studies that kind of overlap. Ella's going to talk about infants and some that are children. The child study has not been funded at all, so we have fewer participants, but people continue to give their time. So thank you for participating, and we'll share what we've got. The natural history includes multiple things. Our testing, well, not the natural history per se, but the research battery includes standardized tests, surveys, published instruments, questionnaires that are commonly used. And we were able to set up our battery so that it relates to a battery that's been used in other developmental populations, so we can directly compare across groups. We also do a standard parent interview called the Vineland. And then lastly, these study-specific questionnaires are typically the ones that we use for natural history. And we support those with items from some of the others just to make sure that there's consistency in responses. The other thing I'll say about the natural history questionnaires is we created ours in collaboration with Dr. Elliot Shearer and Dr. Warren Brown at Fuller and at UCSF. And with these other collaborators in other fields so that we could merge our data sets across these different sites and compare groups. So in the next year, one of our dreams and visions is to merge the natural history from Dr. Shear's cohort and ours and Dr. Brown's, which would get us well over 1,000, which is a big jump in numbers and gives us a lot more information. So hopefully we will be headed that direction, building on what you have funded. So as I just said, the goal of a natural history study is to define the baseline, observe and quantify in concrete, clear terms what is happening, the symptoms, the process of getting diagnosed, what kind of clinical care kids are getting, when and how particular challenges and strengths are emerging. So we're looking longitudinally over time, and then we're also looking for variations, maybe subgroups by diagnosis, complete versus partial, those kind of things, or contextual influences. We may even be able to link those that have early language problems with certain symptoms later on. So that's the kind of work that we're doing with all this. And Ella has graciously presented so far the background in her previous presentations, Ella, um, about our cohort. She'll give a little bit of that again, just to get you oriented. Bunch of the background about the pregnancy and birth history. And today we're getting into what most people are really excited to hear about, which are interventions, treatments, and the developmental process through the early years. So take it away, Ella.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Lynn. Um, as Lynn mentioned, I'll be talking today about development and milestones in this natural history study in conjunction with the NIDCC. And so up here on this slide, this slide, sorry, I've got QR codes to the two previous webinars, and I'm stalling a little bit so you have time to scan them if you would like. And if not, they are on the NODCC YouTube and can be accessed there. So I'll move on. All right, so this is our large sample of the natural history study. So we've got 490 participants who have completed a full background survey. And today I'm not going to focus on this large group, but I am going to focus on a smaller group, which is our verified diagnosis sample. And so this is a sample of 222 participants. And these participants, what sets them apart from the larger sample is that they have submitted a postnatal MRI report, meaning that they've submitted records to us of a scan that is after birth, and this is giving us the most accurate information about their diagnosis, and we can confirm it. So today we'll be talking a lot about the differences in DCC diagnosis and our different groups, which are isolated and DCC plus. And so using this verified diagnosis sample will be super important so that we are able to be sure about what we're talking about, or what differences we're talking about in these groups. And so I want to draw your attention to this table right here, as this will be representative of our sample, and we'll be looking a lot at these different groups. So in this first column right here, we have our isolated group. So these are participants with DCC and either common additional neuropathologies or no additional neuropathologies. And our atypical group, or our plus group, are participants with more atypical or not commonly associated with DCC neuropathologies. And so these numbers will be very important as we go along today. And I want to also give just an overview of today. We'll be talking about development and interventions. And I wanted to, again, talk a little bit more about the distinction between physical and behavioral symptoms. So in previous webinars, you might remember that we've talked about a lot about physical symptoms or medical issues that participants may have, or any brain pathology. And so we've talked a lot about that, and I keep mentioning that we'll be coming back to it, and we're coming back to it today. So a lot of these symptoms can affect behaviors or behavioral outcomes, which will be part of what we're talking about today. And you might remember this slide from one of our previous webinars, and this is just one example of how a physical symptom can affect a behavioral outcome. So about 49% of our participants report having either low or high or both low and high tone. And this can affect things like physical development or motor skills. And so, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And all right, so first we'll be starting off with some developmental milestones. And I wanted to orient you a little bit with our survey. So if you haven't seen this survey before, this is what it looks like when when participants are asked about the developmental history of their child. So with each developmental milestone, so for example, rolling, sitting unaided, crawling, participants have the opportunity to choose one of these answers. And so these first three indicate that yes, the child has achieved this milestone. You can also put that they have achieved it but lost it, or that it's not achieved. And there is an opportunity in this text box to insert an exact age of when the participant achieved this. And so a lot of this information that I'll be talking about in the next few slides comes from this text box, but not everyone filled that out. So it's a little bit of a smaller sample, and we will be supplementing it with um, different kind of information that I'll be showing you in the next slide. I also wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer about our sample that's represented. Lynn touched on this a little bit in the beginning. So a majority of our information comes from the infant study. So 6 months to 36 months or 3 years. And a lot of those participants continue on into the fourth and fifth year. But this means that most of our information is coming from pre-6-year-olds. And so it really tapers off pretty quickly there at the end between 6 and 17 years. And so a lot of this information will again be more solid or more confirmed in those younger years. And sorry, I didn't explain this. This figure is showing the number of surveys completed at each time point. So first, we're going to talk about some physical
Actually,
milestones.
Ella, it's not the numbers, it's the number of participants at each time point.
Yes, sorry, I apologize. Yes,
Just clarify.
thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about some physical milestones first. And I wanted to talk about how milestones can be interconnected. And so physical milestones can affect other domains of development. Um, and so, as I mentioned before, issues with muscle tone can affect whether or not participants are achieving physical milestones on time, as well as issues with balance or coordination. Physical milestones and whether or not they're achieved can affect social skills because if you're not able to move independently, it might have an effect on whether or not you're able to go engage in social interactions. And how to support these, it is important that while physical milestones are important, make sure that you're working on other other domains of development. And so, yeah. All right, so we're going to start with the first physical milestone, which is crawling. And so for each, I'll be showing the suggested milestone, but for this first one, I'll be doing it a little bit differently. So this first suggested milestone is from the Cleveland Clinic, whereas the rest will be from the CDC. So I'll show you how that works in the next one. But from the Cleveland Clinic, they suggest that children should start crawling between 7 and 10 months. And so this is the range right here. And on this x-axis, we have age in months. And so with these two figures, on the top, we have our isolated DCC group, and on the bottom, we have our DCC plus group. And this will be the same setup that will be used throughout the webinar. So it'll always be isolated DCC on top and DCC plus on the bottom. And the colors will also remain consistent. So the green here is complete ACC. The pink here is partial ACC, and the yellow here is hypoplasia of the corpus callosum. So again, this setup will remain the same for the rest of the webinar, so I won't explain it at every slide. All right. So for our isolated DCC group, about 69% of the participants are meeting the crawling milestone within the suggested timeframe. And the DCC plus group, it's about 48%. So there's a little bit of a delay in the DCC plus group, but about almost half are meeting this milestone. And so I also want to mention that this is the first of two types of information that we'll be or types of data that we'll be looking at for each of these milestones. And so this is showing an exact number or an exact age of when participants are achieving this. As I mentioned before, we don't have this information for every participant, so while we will be showing exact age for some of them, we will also be showing when participants reported having this milestone achieved. So on the bottom here, we have all of our time points. And so starting at less than 6 months, 6 months, 12 months, and so on. This figure is showing what percent of participants that filled out this survey at this time point achieved crawling by that time point. So for example, I know that was a lot of words. For example, at the 6-month time point, for the amount of people that filled out the 6-month time point in the isolated DCC group, about 12% across all groups reported crawling by 6 months. And so, as we can see here, a majority of our participants are crawling before 30 months, with some other reports before 7 years. And what I wanted to explain here is that it's not that participants, for example, at this 14-year time point, are not crawling until 14 years. Some of them may have just started the survey or the study, so they may not have had a chance to report it until 14 years. But we know that by 14 years, they are reporting that. And so the value in this figure is showing that a lot of our participants are achieving this milestone, and we get a general range of when they're completing this milestone. So our next milestone we'll be talking about is pulling to a stand. And so for the rest of these milestones, we'll be talking about the CDC suggested milestone, which is 12 months. And so the way this milestone or the suggested milestone works is at the 75th percentile is the milestone. So about 75% of kids are expected to pull to a stand by 12 months. And so that is the number we'll be comparing to is 75. And so for pulling to a stand, for our isolated group, about 77% of our participants are meeting this milestone, which is right on par with that 75th percentile. Whereas the DCC plus group, about 59% are meeting this milestone by 12 months. So a little bit lower, but still a majority of our participants are meeting that milestone by this time point. Right. And just sort of fortifying this information, for isolated participants, a majority report having completed this milestone by 30 months, and similarly with the DCC plus group. For our next milestone, we'll be talking about first steps. And so this one is a little bit more complicated in that in our survey, we ask about age of walking, but the CDC milestone lists two different walking milestones, the first being first steps, which is suggested to be by 15 months, and the second is walking independently, which is suggested by 18 months. And in our survey, we're not as clear with meaning first steps or walking independently, so I included both, and I have both sets of information for you today. So for our isolated group, 86% of our participants are meeting the later milestone, so that 18-month milestone, whereas 62% are meeting that 15-month milestone, and which ends up averaging to about 75. And with the DCC plus group, about 66% are meeting the later milestone, and about 41% are meeting that first milestone. So again, we're seeing a little bit of a delay with the DCC plus group, and we haven't seen very much difference between the different DCC diagnoses yet. And this is shown again here, with a lot of our participants meeting this milestone at the 18-month time point. So in the isolated group with the hypoplasia participants and the complete ACC participants, about 75% of the participants who filled out that 18-month time point survey are reporting that they achieved their first steps by 18 months. And it's a little bit lower in that DCC plus group, which mirrors what we saw in the last slide as well. And we don't have an exact age, figures with an exact age for running, because not as much were reported for running. So we just have this, again, percentile figure. And we're seeing with the isolated and DCC plus groups, a majority of our participants are completing this milestone, or about 50% by 6 years. So again, we are seeing confirmation that our participants are achieving this milestone. Um, yeah. So next we'll be talking a little bit about communication milestones. And things that could affect communication milestones are things, again, like tone, as well as visual or auditory complications. And these, again, could affect social skills, especially with social communication. And again, continuing to support other domains of development, as well as encouraging interaction, are suggestions that we have on how to support communication milestones. So the first communication milestone that we have is babbling. And so with our isolated DCC participants, about 84% of them are meeting this CDC milestone of 9 months, with many of them reporting it by 7 months, right here, as we can see. And the DCC plus group is about 71% of them are meeting that milestone, so a little bit closer to that 75th percentile range. And again, this is seen in this figure where a lot of participants are reporting this by 2 years or 2.5 years. Next, we have first words. And again, we have sort of a more complicated one, just like the first steps, in that there are two CDC milestones, the first being saying either mama or dada or other names for a caregiver. And then the second milestone being other words. And so participants sometimes reported their first word other than a name for a parent or caregiver, and sometimes they reported that name for the parent or caregiver, so we included both to be a bit more inclusive. And so in our isolated DCC sample, about 83% of our participants are meeting that later milestone of having their first words by 15 months, and about 67 are meeting the milestone of 12 months. So again, averaging out in the 75th percentile range. For our DCC plus group, we're seeing that that's pretty similar to the isolated group in that 81% are meeting that later milestone and 63% are meeting that first milestone. So again, really in that same range for first words. And again, this is just fortified by this percent figure, with a lot of our participants meeting this milestone before 2 years. So the last domain of development we'll be talking about is daily living or daily living skills. And so things that could affect daily living milestones are, again, tone and motor skills, being able to get around and things like that, as well as communication, being able to communicate needs. Yeah. All right. So these could also affect ability of adaptive functioning. And again, to support these, we encourage communication. We encouraging communication, sorry, and making sure that your child or your loved one with a DCC is able to have these daily living skills. And so the milestone we'll be talking about with daily living skills is toilet training or potty training. And so in this figure, we can see that very few participants achieved this milestone before 3 years, with the majority being at about 4 or 5 years. And this goes for both isolated and DCC plus, with the majority of participants reporting having achieved it by about 7 or 8 years. And so next, I'm going to talk about some early intervention, types of early intervention. And so these are the types of early intervention that we ask about in our survey. So these are the ones we'll be talking about today, but this is not an exhaustive list of types of early intervention. And I will be talking more about that towards the end of the webinar. So first, talking about occupational therapy, the focus of occupational therapy is ability in everyday life. So daily living skills, things that you're doing every day. And um, this is really important to focus on in individuals with a DCC because there are documented delays in adaptive functioning as well as motor skills. So really honing in on um, those skills in occupational therapy can be really helpful. And some examples of occupational therapy could include working on fine motor skills, working on sensory integration and comfortability, and working on daily living skills as well. We'll also be talking about speech or feeding therapy. And so this focus is on language use and comprehension, as well as feeding skills, especially in the early intervention before kids are speaking. And so the importance in somebody with a DCC is that there is a delay in motor skills and fine motor skills, as well as social communication and language comprehension. And so, again, really honing in on those skills early on will be really helpful. And some examples of speech therapy in practice are, or feeding therapy, are swallowing skills, again, with the very early intervention, and later on, speech and gesture practice. We'll also be talking about physical therapy, which this focuses on motor skill development, muscle strengthening, and mobility. And this is important in individuals with a DCC, again, due to low tone and motor delays and delay in motor skills. And some examples of physical therapy could be play-based activity to support achieving physical milestones or motor skills, and balance practice. We'll also be talking about vision therapy, and I saw somewhere that can be described as physical therapy for the eyes, which I really liked. So that's how we're gonna go with it here. And the focus in individuals with DCC, it's important because individuals with a DCC have a higher rate of visual complications. So this can be more relevant for individuals with a DCC than the general population. And some examples could be eye tracking exercises, focus skills, and really strengthening vision. And lastly, we'll be talking about psychological therapy. So this is support for emotions and thoughts and talking through things. And this is really important in individuals with a DCC because it's important to work on emotional processing and social communication, as there can be delays in those domains as well. And some examples are working on emotional regulation and thought framing. And so again, I wanted to show that the survey for this portion, so participants for each type of therapy that I just mentioned are able to check any amount of these boxes to show when and if they are completing or involved in these therapies, as well as they're able to show how many days a week they're going to these. So first, with occupational therapy or OT, this figure is looking at what percent of our participants have ever attended occupational therapy. And so this graph is a little bit different from the ones we saw before. So on the bottom here, we have this first group is complete ACC, middle group being partial ACC, and this last group being hypoplasia. And in the light blue here, we have isolated, and in the dark blue, we have plus. And so again, this is looking at percent of participants that reported going to occupational therapy. And over half of our participants have reported either current or prior involvement in occupational therapy, with it just being a slightly higher percentage in individuals with DCC plus. And this next figure, it looks a little wild, but again, we'll be going back to that structure of on top having the isolated DCC and on bottom having DCC plus. And this is percent of participants enrolled in occupational therapy by age at specific time points. So on the bottom here, we have all of our time points listed, or all of our possible time points listed. And so for each time point, we can see what percent of participants that filled out this survey at this time point were currently involved in, or at that time involved in occupational therapy. And so across the board, we're seeing pretty high participation in OT, a bit more from the DCC plus group, which makes sense. There's a little bit more to work on with DCC plus. And we're also seeing that there's very high participation from individuals with hypoplasia of the corpus callosum across both isolated and plus groups. And so next we'll be talking about speech therapy. And so going back to that other type of figure we're looking at, this is the percent of participants that have ever reported ever using speech therapy. And so again, over half of our participants have reported participation in speech therapy, with a bit higher in the plus group, especially in the partial and hypoplasia groups. But across the board, pretty high participation in speech therapy. And this is shown again here with our percent enrolled in speech therapy by individual time points. Early on, we're seeing a lot more participation from the DCC plus group in the first couple of years of life, and that continues, whereas the isolated group is increases a bit more over time. Yes, all right. And so next we'll be talking about physical therapy. And for physical therapy, we're seeing a higher percentage across the board from all groups for participation ever in physical therapy, almost 75% for all groups, with just a slightly higher percentage, again, for the DCC group. And by age, we're seeing that the DCC plus group is showing higher participation across the board compared to the isolated group, though there is still a high participation in the isolated group. And again, we're seeing that individuals with hypoplasia are seeking out interventions at a higher percentage than individuals with complete or partial agenesis. So for vision therapy, these numbers are a bit lower, as you can see, than our previous types of interventions. And this makes sense because vision therapy is often reactive rather than preventative. So usually individuals are seeking this out after finding a visual abnormality. And so that's why that is a bit lower. But we are still seeing participation from both groups, though much higher in the DCC plus group, which makes sense. If we remember this slide from a previous webinar, participants with DCC plus, so these are the numbers in parentheses. I know this is a lot of information. We don't need to know too much about it. But individuals with DCC plus have a higher rate of visual abnormalities than individuals with isolated DCC. So it makes sense that we are seeing overall more participation from the DCC plus group. And this is echoed in the percent enrolled by age figure, with far more individuals with DCC plus reporting participation in vision therapy than individuals with isolated DCC. And again, we're seeing that individuals with hypoplasia are reporting on average much higher participation in vision therapy than our agenesis groups. And lastly, we're going to talk about psychological therapy. So similar to vision, we're seeing much lower numbers than the other types of interventions, with a higher rate of participation from our DCC plus group. But this makes sense. As we talked about in the beginning, our sample has a lot more participation for 6 years, or the age 6 years. And with psychological therapy, it's much more common to participate in the older ages of childhood, so after 6 years, up to 17. And so since we have since we have fewer participants in that age range, age range, it makes sense that we are seeing less participation in that age range. And this is confirmed by these figures of participation by age, because we are seeing a little bit of involvement in the first 6 years, but majority of involvement in those last 10 years of the study. And again, we're seeing, at least in the isolated hypoplasia group, that individuals with hypoplasia are reporting, on average, higher participation in psychological therapy. So overall, should you seek intervention for yourself or for your loved one with a DCC? The answer is yes. There are no negative consequences. It's all upsides. Therapies can, at best, help individuals reach their full potential and help them achieve what they're able to. And at worst, there's really no harm done and there are no negative consequences. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about insurance information since we talked so much about therapy. So for individuals before from 0 to 3 years, there is the Birth to 3 program in the US, focusing on early intervention, specifically OT, PT, and speech. And then from 3 to 18 or 3 to 17, in the US, through public schools, you're able to be evaluated for an IEP or an individualized education program. And so these are ways that you're able to access these therapies and interventions. And another way that you're able to is through the NADCC website. And so there is a new part of the website, which is the resource directory. And if you're on the main page, it's under resources and it will just say directory. And this is a resource in which individuals who are part of the NADCC are able to submit their people or places or resources that they've had good interactions with, and have those available to other people within the NADCC network. And you're able to sort by specialty and states, so you can really hone in on what you need. And for further informational content, you can go to the YouTube channel on the NADCC website or just on YouTube. And there are many more facets of information about these topics. And a lot of these topics have been covered at conferences in the past, and so those will be recorded. And there is also an upcoming conference where I'm sure this will be a topic of conversation. And if you're interested in conference and finding out more on the NADCC website, you can go to events and look at our upcoming conference. But some takeaways from this webinar. On average, we're seeing that individuals with DCC plus are showing a delay in milestone achievement compared to individuals with isolated ACC. For the most part across all domains, though in some domains it's a little bit less of a delay. And we're also seeing a higher percentage of individuals with DCC looking for early intervention or seeking out early intervention than individuals with isolated DCC. And on that front, we're also seeing that individuals with hypoplasia across both the isolated and plus groups tend to seek intervention more often than those with complete agenesis or partial agenesis. And our final takeaway is that you should seek intervention as early as possible to support the best possible outcome, and intervene before the delays begin if there are going to be delays, especially if you're able to have DCC diagnosed prelatally or at birth. You'll really get the early intervention side of early intervention. And there's one more upcoming webinar in this series, which this date is wrong. I apologize. It should say June 16th at 8 p.m. And this will be our last webinar where we'll be talking about the emergence of autism spectrum disorder and other diagnoses in later childhood. And I want to thank everyone who has contributed to this project. Really could not have done it without the ANADCC. We're so appreciative and excited to be working with you and having this all come to fruition. An extra special thank you to everyone who's participated in the research program. I know you've put in hours and hours of your time, and I'm hoping that you're able to see this and yeah, thank you so much. And if you're not already enrolled in our study, you can enroll now with the QR code on the left. And if you're not sure, you can send us an email and we'll let you know if you're already enrolled or if you have any questions. I'll be the one answering. So, yeah. All right.
Thank you, Ella. I see one question from Diana about have we seen effects of on longitudinal outcomes? We have not been looking yet at any kind of contingencies, but that is definitely where we'll be going. Part of it is the numbers, and part of it is some of the challenge. You have to have really large numbers to be able to do any real contingency analysis without actually having interventions or controlling the interventions. So it's kind of a methodological problem, but we'll let you know when we can analyze it. One thing that struck me as I was listening is we have said for a while, and it's kind of generally thought that having other problems will make things more challenging. So having plus conditions, you would expect that you would have a greater likelihood of having delays. But this is the first time we've documented it in early childhood. Um, and, we're giving you some of the rougher graphs at this point. Ella's just getting all of this really consolidated. Um, there will be more analysis coming. But to be able to document it is really critical uh, because, in part, one of the things that happens in prenatal diagnosis is families want to know what to expect. And I've had some conversations with the perinatal folks, and they say things like, well, most kids do fine. And I, as somebody who's mainly studied adults, I'm thinking, no, they don't. Most do fine. There are lots of challenges. But if you think about the first 2 years of life and you think of developmental milestones, that's what our data is showing is yes, they are doing fine. They are keeping up. Um, and so being able to document that also for families over time and say, yes, this is a likely pattern, what that means, which features might predict which kids are going to have more challenges or not, or does it predict anything? Who knows? But yeah, a lot of the kiddos do really well in those first years. That said, if they have additional malformations or if they have hypoplasia, they seem to be at greater risk of having delays. And that is consistent with another study that we are about to publish soon. So, okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
Okay, well, I'm guessing if people have questions too, they can also email you on this email shown too. So great.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Ella and Lynn, for putting this together. And I look forward to the last one. You're almost there. So thanks, everybody, for
Thanks, everybody.
coming on tonight. And we will see you again in June. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.